I noticed that.
All right. I am Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am in sunny Baja, California, where nothing is on fire. Statistically, I'm sure something is on fire, but there are not apocalyptic wildfires going on for sure. But I will be back in Los Angeles, sometime next week, and a week from Saturday on the 18th, the one and only Matt McManus is going to be in LA. He is going to be talking to me about his book, The Political Theory of Liberal Socialism.
Nice photo.
Yeah.
Thanks.
At the beer garden outside of Lawless Brewing Company, assuming that hasn't burned down. And that's going to be at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday the 18th. So if you are in Southern California, or will have returned from being evacuated from Southern California by then, come by, check it out. It's it's going to be basically. I think we are going to be able to film it, but who knows when it makes it up here. But it's basically, think of it as a live podcast. It's going to, it's going to be, this is not uptight paper to conference Matt. This is loose beer in his hand while he's answering questions, Matt. So everybody will have a good time. It's an outdoor event, so you could probably meet my dog if you go. So
nice.
Come out and do that.
Never seen this one, but someone in the chat describes Matt as the lost trailer park boy. Nice.
Funny story, actually. My going away party at college, we did a Trailer Park Boys theme party.
There you go.
And I was Ray from the Trailer Park Boys, so they're like, you're always that one who's dispensing like pseudo profound wisdom to people when really you're just getting drunk and fucked up. And so we think that this is the role that you were meant to play, and I inhabited it with relish, I got to say.
Yeah,
and do you even know that show? Did that show ever make it to the States?
It made it to I think a lot of Americans have seen it. I am not one of them. I mostly know about it because when I was in London a couple of months ago, Matt spent like half an hour telling me about it.
It's true. The thing is, for a little while, that show was kind of a cultural cachet for Canada. When I was living in Ireland for a year, and I told people that's where I was from, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you guys, you do hockey." And what's his face? That whole Butters, Bubbles. I'm like, Trailer Park Boys. They're like, yeah, the show where everyone gets drunk and they fucking try to steal things. That one, right? I'm like,
shocking. This would appeal to the Irish.
Yeah, exactly, right. I was like, well, so those are the two things that we're known for. We play hockey and we do shows about drunk trailer park drug dealers. Mm-hmm. Not a bad thing to have as our cultural record.
Yeah, well, for as long as there is a Canadian culture, my understanding is that the Conschluss is coming, so may soon be the 51st state. It's actually kind of funny they keep saying 51st state because presumably it would be like several states. But anyway,
yeah, I was wondering about that myself. Yeah, how would that work? Would it just be one state? I mean, I'm sure at the very least, I think Quebec would be very upset about that.
Yeah. Well, that would actually be one reason to almost do it. It's like fucking the Americans want to deal with Quebecers, it can be their problem from fucking now on, right?
I'd countersign. La Belle Provence has a very profound place in my heart, and I find them absolutely delightful.
I agree.
I'm in British Columbia, which is about as far from Quebec as you can get.
I lived in Quebec for 7 years. I love it. Montreal is one of my favorite cities, man. Absolutely, right? Canada would be a much poorer place without Quebec.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, that kind of sounded like a hostage.
Unlike Alberta. I love Quebec, but Alberta brings out my inner Serb. And nothing is I'll save that for when we have the P/P interview to dissect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny you made the Slavic connection. I was thinking, as Matt said that, about a line that's always stuck in my memory from Ted Rawls' travelogue of being in Afghanistan right after the American invasion, and there, a bunch of foreign reporters are in the back of like an open back truck, kind of looking at the bombed out landscape, and there's this old Russian guy who just starts laughing and says, "What's so funny?" And this guy was a veteran of the Soviet War and Afghanistan. He said, "Oh, all this, it's your problem now."
Well, the thing is, like, Quebec is probably one of the most culturally rich places in the entire country, and Montreal is 100% the most fun place in the country, certainly that I've been to. But it takes a certain kind of political hospitality to deal with the demands that Quebec will make of you year after year after year, and I know for a fact that the Republicans do not have the
any time for that. Anytime. Well, did you see when Trudeau was giving his resignation speech? I think they were asking him questions, and the media, and he kept having to answer them in both French and English, and that would just drive Americans absolutely crazy.
like Jim Gaffigan had a funny comment about this. He's like, "So as I understand it, your country was founded upon a sacred principle, which is that in the 19th century, all the English people agreed to learn French, and all the French agreed to keep being French." And I was like, not necessarily a bad pocket summary of the founding of the state. Pretty true. The Catholic bit is also important and underplayed, but we can get into that later on.
Well, if there is going to be, if we are going to finally fulfill the South Park prophecy and invade Canada, then I know that the person we're here to watch today would really put up some stiff resistance. So I saw this tweet from Mr. Poilievre. Says Canada will never be the 51st state, period. We are a great and independent country. We are the best friends to the U.S. We spent billions of dollars and hundreds of lives helping Americans retaliate against al-Qaeda's 9/11 attacks.
Oh, God.
We supply the U.S. with billions of dollars of high quality and totally reliable energy, well below market prices. We buy hundreds of billions of dollars of American goods. Our weak and pathetic NDP Liberal governments failed to make these obvious points. I'll fight for Canada. When I am Prime Minister, we will rebuild our military and take control of the border to secure both Canada and the U.S. We'll take back control of our Arctic to keep Russia and China out. We'll axe taxes, slash red tape, and rapidly greenlight massive resource projects to bring home paychecks and production to our country. In other words, we will put Canada first. And I remember reading that, just thinking, it's like, okay, so like a fair summary of this tweet would be, we will never be part of your country. Never. Also, I love you so much, Master. Please don't.
Yeah, that was kind of bugged me about it also, right? It's kind of like, listen, we're not going to join you, but if you want to spank us routinely and get us to do everything that you tell us to, then sure, we'll be around with that.
Why make Canada the 51st state when it's already the second Puerto Rico?
Yeah, exactly. This is, by the way, I should add, pretty much every Canadian politician that has responded to this has basically had a very similar tweet or like response where they're like, "We will never do this, but like we love you." Like literally, I think the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, said something. He's like, "We love our American, but we're not going to be part of it. But like, we want to have trade deals and do whatever you want, basically."
To be fair, until the PRC alliance is secure, that's what they have to say.
I remember this is one of the most amazing moments I can recall in Canadian politics. It was during the November 2020 election. The pandemic was going on, and somebody just pointedly asked Trudeau, like, "So Trump is denying that he lost the election. What are your thoughts on this?" And this became viral for a little while because he stared at the camera for 30 seconds, just like rotating in his head, like, gotta find a really careful way of doing this. And he was like, "I believe that democratic principles, and then said something just completely non-committal and nonchalant, right? And that's the kind of position that a lot of Canadian politicians are in given the situation.
To be fair, that's the job, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you antagonize the United States by saying things that are patently true and obvious, then that damages Canadian interests. The one reason why Trudeau was extremely appropriate as a Canadian prime minister is because he understood how to be a sycophant without making it too obvious.
Yeah.
He understood how to grovel and toady while still being handsome and, the alphast of the betas.
Yeah, there's an art to it, right?
And not everybody can do it.
No. I mean, probably the closest I can think of to a Canadian politician who actively defied the United States, which was actually meaningful, was in the 2000s, when obviously we refused to sign off on the Iraq War. And to your point, Kuba, the Bush administration punished the country extremely heavily for that. And you can still see some of the material effects today. Like I open my window, I can look across the river to downtown Windsor, and the place was just devastated when the Bush administration made it harder for basically 18-year-old college kids to go drink in Canada, which I also think is a crime for many other reasons, but we won't get into that, right? But that was at least in part because of spite, because Canada wouldn't sign off on the Iraq War. Looks like a good decision in hindsight, right? But it really kind of demonstrates just how devastating even the kind of petulant response Americans can have if Canadians don't do what they tell you to do can be.
Well, so we are gathered here today to
thanks for getting us on track, Ben. I appreciate it.
To watch Dr. Jordan Peterson have his sit down with the author of that tweet, Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre. Okay. And yeah, this is that just now is a demonstration of why all the rest of these people are here. So I have, I mean, look, I did grow up very close to Canada. We did my English Lit and AP English classes in high school. I'd like field trips to Stratford. I was occasionally among those crowds of 19-year-olds at the bar in Windsor, all of that stuff. So not completely unfamiliar, but also I only tend to notice the existence of Canadian politicians when they wear blackface or get caught smoking crack. So I thought
that's a real insider reference, and I respect you for knowing that.
I thought we'd bring on the super team of all of the Canadian regulars on GTAA. So we have Matt McManus, of course, Victor Bruzzone, and Deep State Kuba. And those are two Ontarians and one British Columbian, which is actually the one and only time I've been to Western Canada. Actually, was to go to Kuba's wedding. This is and
it was terrible. No one should go. Awful. And it's just like one giant strip mall. Please remain in your homes. Do not look into the Okanagan.
No, it was lovely once we got there. We did have the most obnoxious Canadian border guard I've ever met, but
Tony
on the way in. But yes, once there it was lovely. But in any case, so the show is probably not going to be back for real until probably maybe Monday after next. So to hold people off, thought we would watch this meeting of the minds between these two prominent Canadians, Kuba.
And just one thing before we start, on Saturday at 9 a.m., the chat here has been complaining that Ben has poached me from TIR. So I'm back with Jason for an Ask Kuba Anything type chat hour, 2 hours, however long it takes. Ask Kuba anything, aka.
Nice.
9 a.m. Saturday.
I also want to add a content warning before this. So I met Pierre Poilievre a couple times back when my undergraduate degree. He's also the member of parliament for the riding where I grew up and that I still identify with around Stittsville. So I just want to say that I hate the man with a personal passion that is almost religious in its fervor. If somebody were to offer me an hour of time with him or a swift kick to the testicles, I would happily take like 2 swift kicks to the testicles just to make sure that I was inoculated against seeing him. So I cannot promise that I won't get very frustrated during this.
Well,
as, you know, my innate Canadianness gives way to my just profound burning hatred for the guy. But
he brings out your inner Serb.
To be yes, there you go. Thank you, Cuba. I'll do my best to be temperate and polite the way a Canadian should.
Yeah, I saw Jandra World post earlier today. A classic koan, which is if a Canadian falls in the woods and nobody's around, does he still say sorry?
Yes. Oh God.
Yeah. You said it for all of us.
Hello, everybody. I had the opportunity and the privilege today to speak with Mr. Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of Canada's Federal Conservative Party, but also, barring catastrophe and God willing, Canada's next Prime Minister. A transition in power in this country is likely to take place sometime between March and October or November of 2025. And it appears very probable that Pierre Poilievre is the heir presumptive and will be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And so I talked to Mr. Poilievre 2.5 years ago, which was quite shocking to me. I thought it had been more recently than that. And a lot has transpired in the meantime. What did I talk about with Pierre? Well, I think mostly what I did was give Canadians and people on the international side a chance to see who this man is in an hour and a half of discussion, and the extra half an hour on the Daily Wire side. You have enough time to get a sense of how someone responds spontaneously and emotionally and cognitively to complex and challenging questions in a manner that's not rehearsed. That's the huge advantage of the podcast format. We talked about all the stories that Mr. Poilievre has heard in his thousands of event interactions with Canadians in industrial settings, in manufacturing settings, in academic settings, so that he could inform himself about the true situation that's facing Canadians struggling to make ends meet, despite their best efforts now, which is a dismal reality in Canada with its excessive housing prices and diminishing economy. Most importantly, perhaps, what is his vision of the future that both threatens and provides opportunity for Canadians? How is it possible for the citizens of this great country to dig themselves out of the malaise and pit that has been dug for them and by them over the last 9 years? And what could be done to remove the impediments such that this country could become the dynamic industrial powerhouse that it certainly could easily become? So join us for all that. So, sir, it's been almost 2.5 years since we sat down to talk the time before. So I guess the first thing I'd like to know is, what have you been doing during that time? I'd like to hear about your day-to-day schedule and your week-to-week schedule. Like, lay out your job.
Basically, we have 2 parts to my professional life. It's very bifurcated. There's the Parliament Hill side, which is, early morning meeting with my leadership team, House Leader, Deputy Leader, Whip, etc., to plan out the day, the battle plan for our parliamentary committees, question period, etc. That is punctuated by one weekly caucus meeting and just the daily prosecution of the government, which is the quintessential role of an opposition leader. And then the other part to my life is touring. I asked my assistant today how many events we had done over the last year, and he said it was exactly 600. I mean, a few weeks ago it was 570 something. So we've done 600 events, and those are like tours at mills, mines, factories, farms, high-tech facilities, and we tour in, see how the place operates. Then I give a short speech, do a question and answer, and then I just mull about and shake hands with the workers for 25 minutes to an hour, and then I go on to the next stop and do it all over again. And we did that in 9 provinces and 2 territories this year. And so that's a summary of my workload and work plan to do my job.
And you said 600 events. You made allusion when we were driving over here that the weekends are particularly packed, that you'll do like 10 events on Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
And so what a typical event, what do you enjoy about the events? Why are they useful? And what do you learn?
Well, first of all, you get a practical,
I will say this about Pierre.
insight into
for being a charisma black hole that's like bigger than Gargantua in Interstellar, the fact that he's riding at around 44% in the polls right now is a real testament to how Canadians like their politicians, which is very often boring as you possibly can get. You know, we sit there and you're like, oh, fucking that guy's wearing a red tie. That's way too fucking exciting right now. We need, you know, very basic pastel colors. It's good. That's safe. That's what we want.
how the country actually works. Like who makes the widgets? How do those get made? How does our supply chain come together? What skill sets do these incredible workers have? What background qualified them to be a licensed welder, or to run a CNC machine, or to be the CEO of a 300-person company that supplies parts into the American economy? And that practical insight, I think, is important if you want to lead a government and a national economy. So you learn a lot. Then I get to hear the stories of the people who work in these places and get their feedback on what they want, what their dreams and aspirations are.
Yeah, I want to turn to that in some detail. Let me ask you about the parliamentary side too, because I think it'd be useful for people to know how you prepare for what you do in Parliament. It isn't obvious to me that people exactly understand the business of being in opposition, at a really practical level.
Right.
What do you see as your major function? I know you're there to push back against the government and to question and criticize, but it isn't obvious how you go about preparing for that, or how you decide what issues you're going to focus on, and how you distribute the responsibilities among your caucus and your broader team.
So, there's a lot of discretion. You make up your mind when you wake up in the morning. You read the news. You see, I have a team that gives me a full briefing of all the published news from the mainstream media, all the news from the independent and ethnic media, all a download of the entire social media landscape. And then I respond to that by saying, well, I think we have roughly 25 questions we can ask. And I'll say, well, I want 10 on inflation, and 3 on violent crime, and 4 on whatever the subject happens to be in the day. And I want this committee to focus on this today, and that committee to focus on that today. And then our teams go out and we do it. And I've been very blessed because my caucus is extremely talented and they don't need a lot of direction, but we've been acting in unison. And I think that's why our message is pumping out so clearly to people. It's not a cacophony of sound. It's a clear drumbeat. And that's why people are hearing and appreciating our message.
So you feel that your party's well organized at the moment?
Extremely well organized.
Okay, so what's your evidence for that?
Well, by every measure, by every statistical measure, we're stronger than any political party has been in, well, maybe in my lifetime, objectively speaking. Memberships, fundraising, poll numbers,
Right. So people are positive in consequence of that. So it's a lot easier to lead an organization when it's successful.
That's
Obviously, people are much more enthusiastic.
Yes.
Why do you think you're in that position? What's going on that's setting the stage for that? And I don't just mean the failures on the Trudeau side. I mean, what do you think you guys are doing right?
Well, we have a clearer mission statement, and people know exactly why we're in this. Whenever someone asks me if they say, I'm thinking of running for parliament or for mayor or some other political position, what's your advice? Well, I said, well, before I get to the advice, I have a very simple question. Why do you want this job?
Mm-hmm.
And it might seem like a simplistic question, but it's actually the most important question in life. Why? Why are you doing what you're doing? And our answer to that is to bring back the Canadian promise that anyone who works hard gets a great paycheck and a pension that buys them good food and a nice home and a safe neighborhood, that anyone from anywhere can do anything, and that people are in charge of their own lives.
Oh man, this is so exciting. I've been on the edge.
This is painful, man. I watched this interview before the show, and I like you 10% less as a result.
That's fair.
Yeah, I could have told you also that this is him at his medium exciting also, right? So don't exactly think that, in other moments he gets a little bit more fiery, right? This is already him at, up tempo.
I'm a little curious about the ethnic media, that he's consuming, it's like, yeah, no, I do regular media that I listen, read the ethnic media, it's like,
to be fair, because there's a lot, many different immigrant communities, and Canada has had a positive policy in terms of preservation of heritage languages. You have a press that's neither English nor French language in most metropolitan areas. That's the most charitable interpretation. When he says ethnic, he means not Anglo, not Franco. But there are better ways of putting it. Also, he cribbed that whole Canadian promise. That's straight up Bill Clinton, right? Play by the rules and work hard, you can get ahead. And that's, that's great for the 90s, but the whole problem is that Clinton platform brought us to this point, and never really bore the fruit that it held out for the working class, middle class.
Yeah, one thing that I will give him, just in the interest of being charitable, is he's not wrong that the Conservative Party of Canada right now is an unusually disciplined entity. And it's also not all that surprising that he's learned how to do that, since under Stephen Harper, who, for those who don't know, was the Prime Minister of the country for about 9 or 10 years. That tends to be how Canadian cycles goes. It was also a very disciplined entity. And that's where Pierre cut his teeth initially in a bunch of different capacities working under the Harper government. And he seems to have learned a lot of the lessons that were beneficial for the party in those kinds of contexts.
Yeah, I also would also add on to your 10-year cycle thing, because he's talking about how how hungry people are for kind of him, and how popular, how well organized they are. And I think that's true. The Conservative Party is well organized, but I also think that Canadian politics is so cyclical. I just feel like every 10 years, every 9 years, the Canadian public just gets tired. And I feel like it wouldn't really matter what was going on. We're at that point now of 9 years where regardless, I just think that the Canadian public would just be looking for a change.
Yeah, the real political competition is in building yourself up to be the replacement when Canadians get sick of whoever's the incumbent.
Exactly. And whoever was the leader would just probably win. I mean, obviously that's oversimplifying it, but to some extent it's kind of true.
Yeah, just to give non-Canadian listeners kind of some context, right? So in 1984, Brian Mulroney became Prime Minister of the country, leading what was then the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. He held that office for about 9-ish years up until 1933. Kim Campbell then lost the election, and then the Liberal Party came to power. There was Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, they held on actually for a little bit longer until 2006 in various governments. And then the Harper government came along, lasted from 2006 up until 2015. Then Trudeau won a big election. And now it looks like we're going to get up to 2025. And then there's going to be another big electoral win by the Conservative Party. So there's no such thing as like a golden or firm or natural rule in politics about these kinds of things. But there does seem to be a 9, 10, 11-year itch that the Canadian public gets into where they just think like enough is enough and we're going to switch governments. And it's about as close to regularity as you can really get.
All right. Man. All right. Well, let's I don't know what to add to that. Let's give this a chance.
I mean, it's pretty boring, Ben. I mean, I watched some of it. I don't know if it's going to get that much better. Maybe it does. Maybe I'm forgetting. Let's see.
The stuff where he goes on about Trudeau and socialism is not presented in an interesting way, but I'm sure we'll have something to say about it. Let's just put it that way.
That's effectively what we want to deliver. So every day when I'm in Parliament.
So that's a very local vision in a sense, right? It doesn't have that the grandiosity of an international utopian vision, for example.
Well, maybe
it's very down to earth.
I think people are sick and tired of grandiosity. In fact, I think there's something grand about a family that can go on a nice road trip and share stories and build lasting memories that the kids will remember when they're 85 years old.
Despite
I think that's
producing all that nasty carbon dioxide.
That's right. I think those things are grand. And I think with the problem we've had in this country and in all of the countries that have been afflicted by this horrendous utopian wokeism is that it's been focused on the grandiosity of the leadership of the egotistical personalities on top and not the things that are grand and great about the common people. And that is another reason why I think we're doing very well. People are saying finally there's someone who's focused on letting me take back control of my own life and create a great future for my family. So that is, to answer your question, one of the reasons why we've had such incredible success over the last 2 years.
In the beginning was the Word. Christ is a master at using short, mysterious stories. They change.
All right.
Nice.
That was abrupt. Yeah, well, that itself actually was a little bit interesting. That Peterson got him for just a second onto the utopian wokeness.
Yeah. Well,
it'll be more than a second.
Yes, he's going to go on about this at some length. But I know one of the things that Pierre has always been famous for has been being a bit of the attack dog of the Conservative Party. This is actually one of the reasons why, for a long time, the Conservatives were a little too scared to have him be front and center. And there were quite a few reservations about having him as party leader. Actually, some of my friends and family members who I know who are in the Conservative Party of Canada also didn't want him as leader because he's known to be an asshole. Not politically, just interpersonally, he's not supposed to be an easy person to deal with, and he's also supposed to be colossally egotistical, right? But he was clever enough to kind of wait out that cycle that Victor and I and Kuba were talking about, realizing, circa, 2019 and 2021 that people weren't quite tired of the Liberal Party of Canada and that the Conservatives were unlikely to win. And now he's partly being the beneficiary of that itch, and also, the broader reservations about governments that oversaw inflation that seems to be rocking the entire world at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me the thing that is a little bit interesting here is just the intrinsic goofiness of the adjective. This is it's utopian, right? It's like it's like Trudeau was doing a great leap forward or something, and it's like now everybody's just desperate to go back to normal.
The description that he has of Trudeau that's coming up is, on the one hand, it's completely misleading and hysterical in its hyperbole, but also extremely typical. Very it'll be very familiar to Americans because the Trump wing of the Republican Party or conservatives in the sort of national conservative side of European politics are saying pretty much the exact same thing. their little anti-woke crusade.
Yeah, and I should say, like, this kind of language isn't entirely foreign to Canada, and I'd say it's actually becoming more prominent. I mean, Canada has always had a far-right media ecosystem as far back as I can remember, going all the way back to Harper in 2004 when the parties kind of combined, or you can go back to people like Preston Manning and some of the stuff that surrounded the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance. But Pierre very much kind of came of age in a lot of that stuff, right? He's been a political actor pretty much for his entire adult life. He's worked in the Conservative Party or for the Conservative Party or around the Conservative Party in some way, shape, or form. And again, he's always been known to be one of the most aggressively partisan figures within it.
Yeah,
so,
you can find good clips of him in like question period in Parliament, and but he's. I was gonna say though that I think, you know, like I don't know if this is pushing back against you, Matt, but I think that like what Poilievre's been very savvy at doing, like I think Peterson's pushing him to talk about wokeness and that stuff. But like himself on his campaigning, like the Conservative Party of Canada, like their messaging, I think they've been very purposely avoiding that stuff. And I think that's very savvy because like I think the Canadian public, even ones who were like the ones who were just tired of the Liberals who voted like for Trudeau before, like they would be turned off by that. And also I would say that the coalition that a Conservative Party of Canada relies on to get elected, which like I would say like our battleground in Canada, or like one of them is kind of like the area surrounding Toronto, like the Toronto suburbs, and and there's like a lot of non-white immigrants there, and like you kind of need to win those, like to win like that, like so. I think like he's not really like talking about like wokeness or this stuff. Like he's very much talking about housing. I would say it's like one of his number one campaign things, like economic bread and butter issues. And look, that's to his credit. I think he's doing like what politically needs to be done to make people who probably aren't like that conservative, like I have a lot of friends who are just tired of Trudeau, right? I mean, I'm tired of Trudeau, right? I think like all Canadians are tired of Trudeau, right? And like I think he's done enough to sort of get people to sort of pinch their nose and be like, whatever, I'm going to vote for him to see what happens this time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, right? I mean, there's no denying that he has this reputation as an attack dog. That's always been, you know, kind of his shtick. But without a doubt, what really surprised me, and this is, you know, to your point, after he became leader of the party, was the revelation that he was capable of reining that in a lot of instances and focusing on those bread and butter issues, particularly housing, which I don't know a single Canadian in any even medium-sized urban space at this point who's not infuriated by the housing situation. And if you go to Toronto or Ottawa or Vancouver, it's even worse, right? And leaning very heavily into that and cost of living as your primary messaging was very, very smart. So, like I said,
these
no
are
doubt
also
that, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
These are also issues, housing and inflation. They are moved by larger factors that are really outside of the control of the federal government. Inflation, especially post-COVID, that's been driven by supply shocks and then a great deal of profit taking. Some of it facilitated by the outgoing Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, at his like old bread price fixing job. And those, granted, Trudeau didn't really do much to alter the problem of cartels, excessive concentration in the Canadian key sectors of the Canadian economy, but things didn't get worse on that front either. And there is his immigration policy, right, has led to an increased stress on the housing market. There is that, right? Supply has not caught up with demand, but a lot of what is blamed on the policies of the Liberal government are just factors that are plaguing most Western countries. And Trudeau had the bad luck to be in the hot seat when all of these systemic factors hit Canada, rather than being the author of the ills of the Canadian economy.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you look at GDP growth per capita over, let's just go between the Harper and the Trudeau years. For the most part, it's very, very hard to make the case that the Conservative Party of Canada is a better economic steward of the country if you're just looking at GDP per capita than the Liberal Party of Canada. It's not that they're terrible, right? It's just that there's really not very much of a difference between them, right? GDP growth under Harper, ranged around 1.5 to 2%. Obviously collapsed in 2009 because of the Great Recession. Again, largely outside of control. And then was kind of medium and sluggish up until Trudeau took power in 2015. Then more or less same kind of thing, 2-3%. Big drop off during the pandemic, which can't really blame any government for necessarily. There was actually a big upswing in GDP growth in 2021 when the economy opened up again. And some people actually thought that Canada was doing unusually well economically in terms of GDP growth per capita and also getting people back to work. But then soon enough, things kind of trailed off again. And now you're seeing, 2 to 3% growth. A lot of it actually fueled by incoming immigrants. So
and
nobody exactly can claim to be the progenitor of an economic boom in this country compared to the other party.
But there is a substantial difference in the source of economic growth.
Yes.
The sectors that are favored by liberal versus conservative governments, especially in the last 20 years. If we take Harper as the first sort of modern conservative prime minister, right, no longer progressive, then the entire political economic policy of his government was as much Albertan oil as quickly as possible with as little restriction as possible. And this, when the world is thirsty for oil and there's high energy prices, it's great. Just ask Venezuela, right? If the oil price is high enough, any oil exporter can have stronger than average growth. That produces knock-on effects that actually can be quite devastating to other segments of the economy. The currency appreciates, which makes exports less competitive. So you see manufacturing in Eastern Canada suffering at the same time as the oil patch in Alberta explodes. And the entire premise of Poilievre's program is that we can Alberta our way back to prosperity. But apart from the sort of carbon effects and the sectoral imbalance, there's also a political dynamic to favoring oil over manufacturing.
Yeah.
The more influence that Alberta gets as a driver for growth, the further right Canadian politics goes, and the more influence and resources the most conservative elements in Canada have at their disposal to compete against the Liberals and, NDP, Bloc Québécois, the other guys.
Yeah, and I want to say, I do just want to gesture to the environmental cost a little bit. So Canada, as I think a lot of people know at this point, is a male oil exporter. It's hard to anticipate just how much oil Canada has, but I've seen some people argue that potentially we could be the most oil-rich country in the entire world, just in terms of untapped reserves. A major problem, particularly in Alberta, though, is this is what's sometimes referred to as dirty oil, because a lot of it is contained in sediment that's located deep within the ground, the so-called oil sands. Around
heavy oil.
Heavy oil around places.
Tar sands, actually.
Yeah. Thank you. Around places like Athabasca or where I was born, for that matter.
Fort McMurray.
Yes, that's right. I was born in Fort McMurray, and removing it comes at an enormous environmental cost, not just because of the carbon that's going to be released, but also because the enormous amount of chemicals that are required to do this that wind up in enormous tailing ponds that often get into water reservoirs that pollute places as far away as BC, and I've even heard the Pacific Ocean, right? So
absolutely. And pipelines are a major issue in Western Canada, and one that separates British Columbia from Alberta. The Albertan oil needs to transit to international markets in order for it to claim a profit. When the Keystone pipeline to the United States was blocked by the Biden administration, the tar sands were or was that even earlier? In any case, the Albertan government and unfortunately the Liberal government under Trudeau pushed a pipeline through British Columbia against the wishes, against the will of the BC government and First Nations along the route. Now, BC relies on tourism for a major segment of its economy. The natural environmental conditions of interior British Columbia are important or crucial to the communities there. Any spill that's from the pipeline becomes a British Columbian liability that is, while the profits return to Alberta. It's a dreadful, dismal situation for British Columbia to be in, especially since the terminal ports in places like Kitimat are in some of the most ecologically sensitive and fragile areas of the BC coast.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of empirical evidence to suggest that as a result of spillings from the large tailing ponds into water reservoirs, First Nations and other communities, particularly in the north of the country that are hard to reach, have really suffered serious medical problems as a result of that. Although, of course, the oil industry has fought those claims tooth and nail wherever it is that they can, right? So to your kind of point about the nature of the economy under Trudeau versus the nature of the economy under Harper, I don't think there's any person who would claim on earth that Trudeau was an anti-oil prime minister, right?
Except for the entire Conservative Party.
Yes, except for the entire Conservative Party, for whom, unless you basically bend the knee to big oil, you're not going far enough, right? However, right, the kind of focus on GDP growth fueled largely by migration and movement into the knowledge sector, you could make a compelling argument that it is less damaging and more progressive, albeit, not nearly enough for my taste, than what you would have under a Poilievre government if he does decide to emulate the Harper policies, which I see no reason why he wouldn't.
Just listen to the cue, then next phase of the interview.
Generally speaking, in relationship to, I would say, establishment organizations and political elites all across the West, a lot of that well-earned. Why should Canadians believe that the vision that you just laid out is something that you hold personally dear and not merely what would you say, a set of carefully calculated campaign slogans?
Well, I look back at everything I've done for my entire political career to the time I was a teenager. Some people even dug up my old university essays, and I've been saying precisely the same thing the entire time. When I was 20,
can I just say that I've always found something really odd and really frustrating when people say something like that. Like Ayn Rand once claimed, I have not changed my philosophy since I was 18 years old. And I'm like, God, that's a fucking frightening thought, right? I mean, think about how dumb you were at 18 years old and how many mistakes you made, even in your undergraduate degree. And then imagine that you're kind of the personality that never bothered to correct any of those mistakes, never bothered to reevaluate your moral positions. There's just something that's so fundamentally obnoxious and myopic about that to me, even like just weird, right?
Yeah, no, hard agree. I mean, I think, I think that if I think back to myself at 18, I mean, there's a certain core of stuff that I thought that was the same, but but also, I mean, I was a dumbass. I mean, so it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's like, those other decades of being alive and like reading and thinking and interacting with the world, it's like you don't manage to, you don't manage to encounter anything that you got wrong and need to rethink.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like, I mean, look, not everyone is like that friend of mine who went from being like a Muslim to a Christian to a communist to a conservative, like over the course of a month in her undergraduate degree. Although that was a lot of fun to hang out with her at that point, right? Because I was like, God, every week's a new adventure, right? But at the very least, if you're doing your undergraduate degree, transitioning from year 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you'd hope there'd be a little bit of intellectual growth. And at the end of it, you'd be like, hey, you know what? Because of some of the stuff I learned in all those classes I'm paying money for, I've changed my mind on X, Y, and Z issues.
I mean, I would go so far as to say that I was wrong about some stuff in like my late 20s.
Yeah, totally. Right. I mean, I change my mind about things relatively often, right? I know Victor does also, because we've talked about that, right? I mean, the idea that you would just sit there and kind of be fucking proud about the fact like, hey, you know what? I mostly got everything right when I was 18 years old. And no one's been able to convince me otherwise since then. and say that as a point of pride, it just makes me think like, fucking man, you know, I just don't know what to say to that, right?
Yeah, it's I think it's a weird brag, honestly, but you know, I guess it's supposed to show that, you know, I guess in context it's supposed to show he doesn't have a hidden agenda because, you know, because look at him, he's, you know, he clearly believes all this stuff because he was saying it in his essays in college when he was 19.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he still has the same view of socialism as a 19-year-old who spent a lot of time on the internet would have. So what can you do?
Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
The title was Building Canada on Freedom. The entire piece was about making the government small and maximizing personal freedom. So that's basically what I'm doing now.
So you have consistency.
Well, there were things
for you.
When I launched my leadership race, I literally had the same language in my leadership launch speech that I had put in that essay 22 or 23 years earlier. And when I was part of the Harper government, we basically fought for and did the same things then that I'm proposing to do now. So as much as you can be assured of anything any political leader says, I've got evidence to back it up.
Okay, so one of the things that's been very distressing to observe, I would say, and I'm going to use the UK as an example. I mean, the UK had 14 straight years of conservative government.
Yeah.
And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, thank God for that, because it could have been Labour. But having said that, they fell 100% prey to the blandishments of the net zero types and brought forward really a catastrophic energy policy. And the UK is suffering dreadfully for that. And their immigration policy, I mean, Keir Starmer apologized for it, which was something remarkable to behold. And so did Kemi Badenoch, who now runs the Conservatives in the UK. Now, the reason I'm bringing them up as an example is because, well, they were a conservative government and they certainly didn't govern by anything approximating conservative principles. And so how do you feel about the probability that if the Conservatives in Canada take power, that they'll be enticed into this global utopian delusion that seems to have enveloped so many leaders, kind of regardless of their political stripe? What do you think, if anything, can inoculate you or has inoculated you against that?
I know better.
Well, elaborate. What do you mean?
I'm not going to do that.
Man, the global utopian delusion. I mean, this is, Matt, you and I were just in the UK. I don't like what exactly did they do for the global utopian delusion? Did I miss it?
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? And I also want to kind of point out the quiet radicalism to what Peterson's implying there without actually embracing it, right? When you're talking about how the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is not radical enough to your taste, the same Conservative Party that brought us Brexit, years and years of chaos, Liz Truss basically single-handedly crashing the UK economy for a period of a couple of weeks, right? And you're saying, you know what, we want those guys, but like more than that, right? They didn't really go quite far enough. Again, my only thought is, I don't know if Jordan's, hitting something really hard these days, but whatever it is, I definitely want a piece of it, right? Because it seems a really good way to dissociate from your problems.
It's the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? If they were real conservatives, then their policies would have worked, and Great Britain would have become a Reaganite utopia. They're really telling on themselves.
What did they used to say? Singapore on the Thames was what they wanted London to be after Brexit, right? Well,
the city of London always does fine, right? They're the house that always wins. It's the rest of the UK that floats and sinks with government policy, right? Oligarch money and the legacy of empire can keep those bankers afloat forever.
Also, I love the way Jordan Peterson talks about net zero types. He always refers to people as types. He's like, the net zero types ruined it.
Yeah, I mean, this is just like, okay. I mean, again, I don't like. It seems like more is the pity if there's a country on the world that's like done some really dramatic climate transition. I don't know which one. Right? Like certainly not the fucking UK.
Yeah.
And a lot of the climate agenda has been set back also by the war with Russia, which disrupted the European energy network. Russian natural gas was supposed to be the bridge fuel, relatively clean, relatively cheap, until you got to renewables. But between the phasing out of nuclear energy in, I believe, I know Germany, I'm not sure if other European countries followed suit, but between that and an attempt to wean itself off of Russian gas abruptly, you've had to return to coal power plants in countries like Poland. It's the net zero types. It's as though Peterson just takes every fake progressive, fake woke, DEI or corporate social responsibility press release at face value and believes that that's the agenda of Davos man, without any critical examination of what policies actually get implemented and what those effects are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's just kind of astonishing, right? I mean, like he thinks that he thinks that that the Tories in Britain were going way too far in the direction of dramatic climate action, right? But like also, thank God they were in power, man, because that's like then like otherwise they might otherwise we could have had I mean, he's not talking about Jeremy Corbyn for that whole period, right? I mean, like that's like otherwise we could have had like the milquetoast hawkish centrists of the British Labour Party in power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you saw him adopt extremely similar rhetoric when the Trudeau government, well, over the course of the Trudeau government, because I guess we're at the tail end of it right now, because even the milquetoast, relatively banal carbon tax that was implemented over the last couple of years, which has done a negligible amount, I should say, to slow down oil production and oil use in Canada, was a bridge too far from them. And let's also be clear, right? Oil and gas has an enormous amount of political clout in Canada, which includes spending lavish amounts of money to make sure that conservative pundits will defend them on everything and everything. Until he passed away recently, Rex Murphy, who was one of Jordan Peterson's, best Canadian buddies, was long in the pay of the oil industry and never missed an opportunity to talk about how in some way, shape, or form it was climate environmentalists who were responsible for all the ills of the world. And if it didn't appear so, then, well, it must somehow be related back to them. Right? So,
Peterson is a notorious hack when it comes to climate and energy. He's been pushing straight oil and gas party line ever since he developed enough of a public following for it to matter. I don't think that it's coincidental that he's promoted by so many establishment conservative figures in Canada and the United States. If he took the measured academic evidence-based view on climate that he purports to represent, then I don't think he would have had quite the same ease of transition into his current pundit job.
Well, Kuba, that just demonstrates what an elitist you are, because I can see that you don't watch Joe Rogan, because if you did watch Joe Rogan, you would have seen the Good Doctor's interview with him where he points out that climate doesn't just refer to one thing. It refers to everything, right? And you can't possibly develop metrics to evaluate what's going on with everything. You just can't. It's pseudoscience, mysticism, and it sounds to me like you're in the pocket of big environmental groups.
Which
they have so much money.
Yeah. I don't remember
Big Green.
What the other half of that conversation looked like, although it is I do like climate change is one of the things that Rogan used to push back on conservative guests on.
Oh, right? Yeah, I remember he did that with it was Candace Owen. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was before she really moved on to her on the Jews and their lies phase, and she was just sort of like doing normal vanilla conservative things, but like the
good old days. Yeah.
When she was yeah, and really like weird deep cut anti-Semitism too, right? The Frankists, right? That's like it's like the kind of anti-Semitism that makes you turn to Google and figure out what the fuck she's talking about. But yeah, like he would be like, oh no, I do think that's real, right? I mean, this is like also and he'd do that a lot with evolution too, and like Guess would say, creationist things. I genuinely don't know whether he still does that or not, but that was always my favorite iteration of Joe Rogan when, like it didn't happen a lot, right? But like occasionally when a conservative guest would say something absolutely batshit insane, and he'd be like, really, bro? I don't think that's true.
Last time I saw that happen was, I don't want to segue too hard on this, but was Matt Walsh when he's like, hundreds of thousands, of children transitioning all over the place. And he's like, is that really true? Let's look that up. And Matt Walsh is like, oh shit. They're really going to roast me online for this one.
I remember that. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, let's back to the utopian globalism and that was represented by the Cameron and Truss governments, and why we could trust that Pierre won't do the same thing to Canada.
And it will be hard because the temptation will be, this is the mistake that conservative parties around the world have made countless times. They think, well, anybody who's got a conservative mindset is already voting for me, so I can go off and chase the ideas of my political opponents, and then everyone will love me because I'll have the conservatives due to the fact that I have the name conservative, and then I'll have all these other people because I've embraced their contrary direction. And in the short term, it works because you manage to have all of these people under, and all of the different political ideologies captured in one tent. But the problem happens when the policies are a disaster. And then people wake up and go, oh my God, my taxes are now up. The inflation is out of control. The deficit is spiraling. There's crime on the streets. So does the temptation exist to try and take on the political policies of the socialists in the short term? Sure, but it's one that I will fiercely resist because I know that by the fourth year of my mandate, people would be enraged because their lives would be even worse. So it will be tough, though. Like it's going to be a trade-off.
Temptation. I mean, I think many leaders fall prey to the temptation to shine on the international stage, right? I mean, I can't remember who it was in the UK. I believe it was the previous Labour Party leader who said that decisions in Westminster were essentially irrelevant because all the important things were happening internationally, right? And so if people are involved in status climbing and they hit the national pinnacle, there's the international world to, what would you say, to dominate or to impress. And that's, I think that the power of that temptation or even of that peer pressure can't be underestimated. So, okay, so now you've been these events, these 600 events that you've gone to. So let's say that's something approximating 1,000 to 1,200 since we last talked. You spent a lot of time speaking to, and I presume listening to ordinary Canadians. I heard you make a speech in the House of Commons that went viral in the last couple of weeks, and you spoke very persuasively on behalf of working class Canadians. And so tell us what you've learned, what you've heard over the last couple of years, and how that's shaped you and changed you, let's say, as you've moved from, as you shifted your position up the political hierarchy and are poised really likely to take the reins in Canada at some point in the next year. You've listened to all these people. And so what have you learned? And what has it made you convinced of, let's say?
Well, first of all, there's the bad news and the good news. The bad news is that people feel like they've done absolutely everything right and their lives are trapped. Young people say, look, okay, I went through, I got an education, I work nonstop, and I have made the calculation that there is no mathematical path for me to own a house. It's just not possible. In Toronto here, for example, if you take the average income and the average house price it would take you 29 years to save up for a down payment. So, you know, if you're
for a down payment,
not to pay it off, forget paying it off. And so if you're a young woman who's got a biological clock, obviously, well, do the math. You know, you start off at, let's say you're 25. Well, you're going to be in your 50s before you can afford the average house. So how are you ever going to have kids? And
that's about the time when people think about downsizing from their house.
That's what they used to think about downsizing. And, you know, they usually had their house paid off back by the time they were in their early 50s. So just to show how dreadfully things have worsened, that's the picture of the youth. Then there's the kind of middle-aged people who do have kids already, and they're terrified of the dangers in the streets. I mean, our streets are just being overtaken by drugs and gangsterism, and other dangers, and they want safety again. And then you have business owners that are saying there's just no way to continue to compete in Canada. We have to look at moving, and that means the next 200 jobs we create is going to be in Ohio or
incidentally
Florida or some other
there's
place.
no mention of the impact of Trump-prompted trade wars, the shredding of NAFTA, the fundamental uncertainty for producers that have been incentivized to concentrate on the American market by this continental economic integration, right? That one reason why you moved to the United States is to mitigate against that risk. And the entire drift of Canadian political economy ever since the US-Canada free trade agreement, which was the precursor to NAFTA, has been producing for the American market, integrating into US supply chains. Acting like Trudeau is the one who's shredding that completely misses the obvious fact that it's the United States that has undermined that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not. Look, we saw how he reacts to the suggestion that Canada would actually be annexed by the United States. Given his tone there, it'd be pretty amazing if in like mundane day-to-day context he said anything negative about the
why buy the cow when you get the milk for free?
Exactly.
Canada. That's the kind of overview that I get. The good news, though, is that people do now have some hope. They think that things can be turned around, and they have clearly and correctly diagnosed the problem, which is entirely political. There is no physical, geographic reason why Canada should struggle to supply people with great opportunities of home ownership and family formation. In fact, we should be the richest country in the world. And people increasingly know that, and they know that if we make the right, albeit difficult, political decisions, that they will once again be able to do as their parents did, which is to say, get a house, start a family, live in a safe neighborhood, raise their kids with good traditional values. That's another thing I'm finding, is that a lot of people are really getting back to those values that we were told were unfashionable. They want, young people today, they want to have families.
Well, there's been a real conservative swing, especially among young men. Well, no wonder, because they've been demonized for 30 straight years for every aspect of their masculinity, from their play preferences to their proclivity to destroy the planet with their ambition. And so there's definitely an opportunity.
There's a very interesting disconnect there, though. I mean, on the one hand, he does accurately describe a lot of the economic malaise that I've consistently heard people talk about in Canada, and that there's some statistical basis for, right? And then he suggests that the reason for this economic malaise is entirely political, but that's disconnected in some important ways from a lot of these cultural orientations for, I think, pretty obviously partisan reasons, right? Let's just take, family formation. There's no implication that one of the reasons why many people might not want to form families, aside from the biological clock reference, is because they can't actually afford a house, so they don't have enough money coming in. In this case, when he's rhetorically talking about it, it's a value issue where people are just choosing not to adopt these kinds of sensibilities. But of course, in other kind of instances, clearly the root of the problem is economic and political, and there we can chastise the government. And I think that's really telling about the kind of selective way that he intends to approach these problems in a manner that eventually maps his own partisan inclinations. Because if you were to say, well, there is this connection between people who want to indulge in family formation and economic malaise, then it'd be very easy for a lot of people to say, well, one of the reasons why poor people might decide not to have families isn't because they have bad values or because they have different values even. It's just because they're too poor to actually have the families that they want. And maybe if we gave them more money, things would change.
And to that point, I mean, like, we don't really have to speculate about this, that there are polls where you just ask people, right? If you're, you'd like to be married, but you're not, if, you'd like to have a kid, but you don't, you'd like to have more kids than you do, why not, right? And if you go through the poll answers, certainly in the US, I assume Canada isn't fundamentally different, then you get answers that are overwhelmingly about economics, right? That's not enough, paid time off, not economic insecurity of people, cost of daycare, I don't have enough time to spend with the kids that I already have, which is the only one in the list that sounds non-economic, but of course it's not, right? I mean, this question of how much free time you have. And I would say that there is like this very well-established way that people try to push back against this, which is to say, oh no, but you're silly. Like, you think that having more economic support, would solve this problem. But, my foolish friend, look around the world. There are all these places in the world where they already have way more of that than, the US does, or even the Canada does. And they've had, horribly declining birth rates there too. It's like, okay, look, not going to deny this is multi-causal, but I also think that this is like a really poorly thought out response because, people, like, the question is not, are Swedes less economically precarious than the US? That's like irrelevant, right? The question is, are Swedes in the 2020s more economically precarious than Swedes 30 years ago, right? Because people are never comparing themselves to would-be parents in some other country where they never had it as good as them anyway, right? Americans aren't comparing themselves to Guatemalans, and Swedes aren't comparing themselves to us, right? They're comparing themselves to their own parents.
Well, to the extent that you do have people comparing themselves internationally, that leads to the type of migration that Jordan Peterson and Poilievre are going to bemoan in the next phase of the interview. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. One is on the family formation front, in their sort of weak tea, small beer way, the Liberal Party has tried to introduce some kind of child care subsidy or relief as a means to address some of the economic underlying causes. And I think that the best way to think about it is that economic security is a necessary but not sufficient cause to encourage family formation. When people are concerned about the future of the planet because of the destabilizing security situation, wars between great power blocs, and increasing international tensions, as well as the existential threat of climate change, which is far from abstract, even in Canada. Right, we're a northern country which may enjoy some benefits from climate change, but British Columbia is on fire every summer now. That wasn't the case 20 years ago, but it is the case now. Wildfires.
Wait. Do you also have like DEI firemen and firewomen? That's probably the explanation, right?
We have persons of fire.
Yes, that's right. Fire persons. That's the main problem.
Yeah, no, it's the it is amazing how quickly the Pepes on Twitter convinced themselves that the big problem in Los Angeles wasn't like big picture things like housing density in places with lots of brush, never mind climate change, right? And or on more mundane level stuff like the fact that the LA Fire Department was already understaffed. And I know there's a lot of argument about the details of this, but I think however you slice the numbers, had millions less in its 2024, 2025 operating budget than it expected to have, right? It's like, no, it's not any of that. It's that the fire chief is a chick.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the problem, right?
and a chick of color, right? That's also not good.
Yeah.
But yeah, to Kuba's point, right? I mean, what I always find interesting about listening to people like Pierre, because he's a smart guy, right? There's no denying that, right? Is again precisely how his approach to these issues will be delineated very clearly based upon his prior ideological convictions, which relates back to what some of us said earlier about how he just doesn't really seem to have the capacity to change or move his mind, even in the face of new evidence, right? So in some circumstances, he'll lean very heavily on political and economic explanations where it's ideologically safe or useful for him to do so. But in other kind of circumstances, in this case, like family formation, he'll very quickly pivot from any of the kind of implications the economic approach might have if that would lead to a more materialist approach to poverty reduction, and suggest, no, if we want people to have families, including poor people, then really what we need is a change in values. We need to go back to those good old-fashioned traditional values. And just to Kuba's point about the kind of policies enacted by the different governments, I'm old enough to remember back, in the 2000s, when there was a big debate between the liberals and the Harper conservatives about the best way to handle, a lot of the anxieties new parents face when they have kids that come into the world. And the liberal and the NDP proposal was actually a fairly good one, which was, well, why don't we just have something that approximates universal daycare? Now, to Kuba's point, a lot of this was pretty milquetoast stuffed, but it was the Harper government that absolutely killed that in its crib and said, no, we're absolutely not doing something like universal daycare. What we'll do is we'll give a very modest tax rebate to those who choose to have children, and they can use that money as they wish, which of course is absolutely nothing compared to the kind of benefits that new families would acquire by having a place to drop their kid off when you have to go to work, right? So the record of Pierre and his party on these issues in terms of actually introducing policies that will benefit new families is absolutely appalling. And given the fact that, to Kuba's point, he said we're pretty much going to do the same thing that Harper did last time, I don't see any reason why things should be expected to change.
Well, and it's also like, quite apart from the fact that it's much better to just directly provide the service, tax rebates are the worst possible way of redistributing to people who need it, because they don't, you kind of have to wait until the end of the year, right, to get it. But it's very to be fair, I mean, American Democrats love tax credits as their go-to solutions to absolutely everything, right? Because it's just so much. It's such an easier political lift, right? To say we'll give people tax credits for X, Y, and Z than to say we're going to provide X, Y, and Z, or even we'll give people money, for X, Y, and Z right now, right? We'd have to have a budget line for it. It's way easier to just do, just be like, oh yeah, no, you'll get the, you get the child care tax credit, you'll get the, you'll get the, help you buy healthcare tax credit, you'll get, if you're, there's even weird shit, you live in a high crime neighborhood where we'll give you your security tax credit, it's just there's so much of this stuff, but I did
also, the great thing about tax credits is that if you don't actually want to go through with it, you can create bureaucratic barriers for anyone to claim it.
Right. Yeah, it's the difference between a coupon and a rebate, right? It's why the latter is so much easier on the bottom line.
And I should also just say, just in terms of dollars and cents, right? The average price of daycare in Canada ranges between about $6,000 to $8,000 per year for a lot of new families, right? It's enormously expensive to put your kids in daycare, right? Harper's, proposal was basically to give Canadian families who have new children a couple $100, maybe, in the low thousands per year. Nothing that would even approximate the cost of daycare, right? So again, the harsh reality is that if you're actually looking at policies that were going to benefit new parents and working parents especially, it's hard to imagine what would have been more beneficial than universal daycare. Certainly a lot more useful than a couple $100 that, I'm sure helped a lot of people out, but isn't going to go very far in an economy as expensive as this
wasn't that when he like there wasn't even that much means testing. He was just going to send checks, like a childcare tax credit, and then didn't the Liberals and the NDP get in a bunch of trouble because they started saying Canadians can't be trusted, they're going to spend it on beer and popcorn?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, which goes to show you again about how left-wing our Liberal Party fundamentally is in its instincts, right? So yeah, that was funny. I remember it was beer and popcorn. Yeah.
It is also, I should say, so okay, it's been much commented on that this guy is so excited and charismatic, but I do, there is you can see sort of shining through the extreme boringness, a little bit of a sort of very, very polite Canadian Trumpism here, because he's got, when he's going on and on about the housing stuff, right? It's it was a very Trump thing that he's saying all this true stuff, right? And he's trying to in some ways the most passionate he got right so far, right? That he's saying all of this accurate things about how crushingly out of reach home ownership has got it for so many people, but it's but it's very Trumpy in that it's just sort of naming the problem is enough to be oh yeah, see, he's different, right? He's it's because it's what does he actually want to do? I mean, it's I actually looked this up because he's talking about it so much. Okay, what's the Poilievre housing plan? And it's I don't know, some tax stuff, some it's all just kind of YIMBYism, and it's well, I don't understand how anybody could seriously think that, given the scope of the problem he described, this would be sufficient to deliver that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, it's not like anybody hasn't thought before that the solution to Canada's housing crisis is just to build more houses. Right. But there are a lot of problems with that, including market problems. Right. And this is one of the kind of perennial problems that you see people like Poilievre work themselves into. Right. Which is that when you're so attached to the idea that market mechanisms are the solution to every social problem, when market factors can actually become a barrier to something like the production of new homes, you're just not really able to contemplate it or think through that in a way that's realistic.
In the United States right now, there's an antitrust action against 6 giant corporate landlords for price fixing. So why isn't that part of the discussion of housing costs? But whenever there's a problem, the standard conservative play in Canada, just as it's the standard Republican play in the United States, is to build up this imaginary cadre of red bureaucrats in municipal, provincial, federal power that are getting in the way of our heroic entrepreneurs from providing everything cheap, safe, and fair to a grateful public. He requires that kind of enemy, that scapegoat. And sure, yeah, maybe there's some ill thought out or regulations different levels of government. Sure, there might be some bureaucratic processes that could be moved, could be expedited, but pretending that there's that level of power in the city planning board enough to create a housing crisis across the country is really giving those bureaucrats way more credit than they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to use the Toronto example, right? Like during the last Ontario election, I worked for the NDP, the Ontario NDP. We actually did reasonably well. We got into the official opposition. And our proposal for fixing the housing crisis, mainly in Toronto, was to rezone a lot of like commercial areas into residential zones, right? So that people could build homes and apartment buildings there, which isn't necessarily the worst idea. The problem fundamentally is that there really needs to be a market appetite to build those kinds of structures. And in some circumstances, it's just not there, right? And there are a lot of complicated reasons for that. But a lot of them also just relate back to people not necessarily wanting to have high density residences in the city. That's going to lower the cost of their already extremely valuable houses. You know, to give an example of the neighborhood that I used to live in Midtown, near Eglinton Station, there are a lot of very, very pretty, very old homes there that are worth millions and millions of dollars, right? For $2, $3, $4, $5 million. There's long been a big push in the city to eventually get people to sell those homes and to replace them with apartment complexes, both to solve the housing problem and potentially also to bring housing costs down. And it's actually been very conservative groups that have insisted that people shouldn't sell their homes. Certainly not to developers who are going to build high density residential complexes, because that's going to lead everyone else's house to depreciate in price. And why would you want to do that, right? Because as long as there's a limited number of homes in the city of Toronto, if you already happen to own one, you're going to make out with a killing if you happen to own it, right? Now, I'm not blaming any individual person or even these boards in Toronto for the decisions that these people are making, right? That's what makes sense to them. But it is a kind of indicator of how market incentives in these cases can inhibit people from selling to people who would actually do something to solve the problem, because as long as they don't sell to them, they're going to have a home that's worth $2 to $3 million that they expect is going to appreciate in price, and nobody who actually wants to get rid of an asset that's like that. Why would you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I also just generally think that the assumption behind all of this stuff about how, the real problem is taxes and red tape and whatever, it's like, yeah, sure, maybe, to some extent, right?
Sure.
But, but it's just that, there's something like assuming that once you clear all that away, I guess this is your point, right? I mean, assuming that the market incentives are then going to work out in ways that's going to result in an abundance of privately built housing always seems a little strange to me, right? I mean, it's like, well, hold on, right? Like, I mean, if you, if you're a landowner and it's if you could sell to somebody else who's going to build a bunch of housing, housing on it that would rake in all this money, it's like, why wouldn't you do that yourself? Or if you have, I guess maybe this is better, right? I mean, if you're in that situation, if you sort of go with the YIMBY premise that it's that, once this happens, then the because of the imperatives of competition, the rent and or mortgages, whatever, get super cheap. It's like, well, okay, so if you're a landowner, I mean, you don't see that coming, right? Like that seems weird to me, right? That that you just it sort of assumes that they can't think just very slightly ahead, So it's like, look, I mean, I'm not saying this stuff can't get anything done, right? In terms of resulting in more housing, but I'm just really skeptical that it could ever have the
there's also very basic issues with the capacity to build and the time frame, right? Yeah. Especially in dense urban areas, it's going to take a while to build apartment buildings or other dense housing units, right? And in Toronto and Vancouver, the core urban areas, we're talking about high rises that 60, 70, 40 stories is not outrageous. And what may very well happen is that Poilievre, incidentally, those mega projects are underway right now. Entire sort of mini towns and districts are being built in Greater Vancouver, in places like Burnaby, around transit corridors. It's actually quite sensible urban planning, but it is time intensive. It takes a while before these investments mature, and they're largely geared because of market incentives towards more affluent buyers. And what may very well happen is that Poilievre takes over, and within 2 or 3 years of his government, some of that capacity comes online, right? Right now, I don't think that there are legions of dissuaded builders in the key areas where the housing crisis is felt more intensely. They're just sitting idle because of regulation. No, when you look around Greater Vancouver, you see a great deal of investment in new housing starts. It's just that it takes a while. And if you're comparing with the development of Canadian housing in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, where you're mainly talking about suburban builds on greenfield property, of course it's going to take a lot longer, right? You can't throw up a high-rise the same way that you can a suburban home. And part of what's going on right now is a transition away from more suburban dispersed housing in Canada to greater concentrations in core urban areas. That's where the jobs are. That's where people want to live. It's exacerbated by the decline of certain resource industries. And in some ways, if you look at the carbon footprint of urbanites versus people who live in the suburbs, it's a positive move. It's a move in the right direction, albeit it's one that is a painful transition, especially if it comes during a period of large-scale population growth because of facilitated increased immigration, right? Your demand is just going up faster than the supply. But that's not it's not the fault of City Hall or environmental regulations, right? Those things just add some costs to the bottom line that builders would prefer to socialize, to push on to the municipality or onto the public.
I'll also add to that, just to kind of add a bit of fun note to this. Over the course of this interview, Pierre comes up with a number of different reasons why it is that there isn't enough housing in Canada. And this is to your point, Kuba. One of them is, of course, the infamous red bureaucrats that you're talking about, who are just apparently decided there's going to be no homes built anywhere ever, right? How believable is that? But the second reason is, he says, it's kind of baffling because we have an awful lot of land. Why aren't we doing anything with it? It's like Canadians have just made this kind of conscious choice to not use the vast territorial sweep of the country to build new cities, new towns, etc. Well, the reality is, to your point, there's not an awful lot of people who have decided that they want to move to Churchill and live with the polar bears. There's a very good reason why historically most Canadians live within about 100 kilometers or 100 miles, I've seen both, of the American border, because that's where a lot of the trade takes place. That's a lot warmer and a lot more pleasant to live around those areas. And also people just want to live in urban settings. And this is a historic transition that's taken place in a country that was predominantly a rural country for a very long period of time. And I don't think people always appreciate the scale of this development. I was looking at municipal records for the Greater Toronto area, not just Toronto, but the Greater Toronto area in the 1970s. The population was about 2.5 million. It's about 6.7 million now. And their expectation is that it was going to grow reasonably gradually to, maybe about 3-4 million by where we are right now, the 2020s, and they're entirely wrong about that, right? Now there's a lot of good that's come from that population increase, including in the city of Toronto, but to your point, it's just taken municipal planners, and it's taken, for that matter, market actors, a very long time to transition to this much more urbanized country. And there are things that we could do that would improve things. I've always been a proponent of devolving more powers, even constitutionally, to the municipal level, since a lot of these decisions are now made at the provincial level, when I don't think that that's the right level of government for making these choices, which is also why I'm happy to hear what's going on in Vancouver right now, right? But the idea that the problem is either, there's too many red bureaucrats getting in the way, or Canadians have just decided we're not going to go live in the Arctic Circle when there's so much land there to build houses, is just ridiculous, even kind of fanciful in a way.
And indeed, taking the construction of new settlements in remote areas, that sort of frontier vision, requires a tremendous social investment in infrastructure, in you didn't get the settlement of the prairies until the CPR came through. So once again, it's a solution that would open up these new areas, assuming people even wanted to live there. When you, as soon as the economy shifted and new opportunities became available in the big cities, especially with the rise of post-secondary education, the prairies started emptying out. The provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan have struggled to try to maintain their population, as have some of the Maritimes, right? The Canadians vote with their feet, and the reality is that there's scarcity in the land available for housing in the places where people want it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that maybe a different way of getting at what I was trying to say earlier is, I think that I think land ownership is very unlike a lot of other commodities, because it's kind of intrinsically monopolistic, right? Like you have you can't it's not like it's not like two people are offering to rent the same space, right? By definition. And I think that there is a much greater tendency to just charge what the market will bear, that I think sort of exclusively focusing on what the supply of housing is, I think misses some of the point, because I think that the demand has a lot to do with is this a place where a lot of people with high income want to live, right? So I'm not going to pretend to have a complete solution here, right? I certainly don't, but I do think that just one option that governments do have, right, that's severely underutilized in all of this, is just building housing themselves, instead of leaving out cookies to entice to entice the market fairies to do it for them, right? I mean, you can government can in fact buy land and and build buildings on the land, right? There's nothing impossible about that, and and it's if you do that in a way that's that's made available to people at across income levels, right? So it's not sort of segregated housing for the poorest people, like classic public housing in the US, with all the social ills that tend to come with that, right? I think that can help a lot. And, this is, I mean, maybe it's just too obvious to make a big deal about it, but I mean, the fact that radical thoughts like that, right? It's oh, you could just build some housing yourself. And, I'm not suggesting that that's the only housing we should have. I know it didn't work out in the Soviet Union, but that, that you could do quite a bit of that. That's just so far outside of the imagination of certainly a conservative like Poilievre, right? It's just I mean, it really gets to why I think it's so I mean, Jordan Peterson says so many provocatively bizarre things all the time, right? It's like easy to like miss the sort of minor ones, right? But the thing about how this guy was speaking for the working class earlier, and it's like, yes, it's worth taking a beat on the absurdity of that.
Well, I also just want to say very quickly that once Canada becomes the 51st state or the 52nd states, if we could divide up, and Trump buys Greenland, there'll be enough land for all, right? You know, everyone will just move to Greenland where everyone wants to live.
It'll be like Blade Runner, you know, a new life awaits you in Greenland.
Yeah, exactly right. And then all of our problems we solve this way. But to your point, it's convenient that I read this book not too long ago. Historian Francis Sejersted wrote a very good book called The Age of Social Democracy, which is about Swedish social democracy, appropriately enough. And he's very, very clear that what he calls the Scandinavian variant of socialism didn't produce some kind of earthly utopia, right? It's a society that has problems like anything else. But one thing, to your point, that they did do quite successfully, particularly around big urban areas like Stockholm, through the mid to late mid 20th century, was just build homes for people who decided that they wanted to live in big urban areas, since urbanization took place in Sweden, like in many other countries. And he points out that by and large, the decision by the government to just build reasonably good homes on the periphery of the city that were connected by strong infrastructure to the rest of the urban space, it was quite successful and quite a popular program, right? So I'm not saying at all that is the solution to all our problems. Just have the government build houses that are reasonably affordable, work in some good municipal infrastructure, and then toodaloo, everything is fine, right? But the fact, to your point, that this just never comes on to the agenda because it's just something that's so beyond the pale for them, even though it has been successfully done in other countries that are comparable in a lot of ways, development, climate, etc., to our own, is again really telling.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I do think that like it's, you know, there are all these like weird facile rhetorical techniques that people have built up in societies like the US and Canada for not you know, for not taking this into account. But it's like, I don't know, it's like, look, is it everything that I want? Is it full socialism? Is it, you know, is it the, you know, end point of history? Clearly not. But it's like, I don't know, like late 20th century Sweden, like that's like probably the best society that humans have devised, right? Like, I mean, you know, it's that should be like a good indicator that if there's stuff that you can pull from there, you should.
Aside from the weather and the food, apparently those.
Well, no, despite the weather and the food. That's what.
Despite the weather and the food, yeah, very good, yeah,
exactly. All right.
There, and clearly your political party and you are capitalizing on that you have the support from young people increasingly right across Canada.
We are winning among youth. In fact, the youth were the first to come on board with me. My rallies were overwhelmingly populated with youth, which is not normal for conservatives.
Right.
And the reason is because in your youth, of course, you as you write it, young people want to have the adventure of their lives. They want to go into the wilderness and earn a living and bring it home and raise kids and have a purpose that's bigger than just short-termism. And I think, 20 years ago, the socialists would go to university campuses and say, vote for us and we'll let you be a kid forever. We'll give you free stuff and you'll never have to get a job. And that was very temporarily popular across the Western world. But then young people woke up and found out this was not a utopia, it was a total dystopia. And that all the things that they really valued and wanted for their lives were impossible when they were being borne down upon by this massive state. They've learned that help is the sunny side of control. And so now young people are, and I love this. This is great news. Our young people are saying, I want to start a business. I want to invent something. I want to create things. I want to become a tradesman. And then when I get good enough at that, I want to hire 5 other tradesmen. And by the time I retire, I want to have 300 employees. And then I want to give that company to my kids. These are the stories that I hear when I go out and about in Canada.
I just feel like this could never be let go by without making this point. Mathematically, how much of any society could have 300 employees?
Yeah, it's true, right?
The key is everybody has to work 5 jobs for different bosses, right? So that way you've got your bases covered.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the
or to your Blade Runner example, right? We'll just create replicants, you know, the kind of slave class people
all right.
who do
Now
all the work for us.
The math, right? Every human can have 300 replicants.
Yeah, and I mean that'll provoke no problems whatsoever, as a lot of sci-fi movies have demonstrated to me time and time again. Yeah, they like it, right? They want to serve us unwittingly.
Yeah, I just, you know, again, it's like it's just never like it's I don't know. It's almost impressive how well that's always kept out of frame. That it's like by definition, you're describing something that most people can't do, right? That like, you know, that you're going to have many, many, many more losers than winners, you know, in this race.
Well, it reminds me of that G.A. Cohen paper about the key. You know, I can't remember exactly the one, right? But sorry, what's the name of the paper, Ben?
The Structure of Proletariat on Freedom.
Yes, thank you. I should know that name. But anyway, just for people who don't know, right? He comes up with this famous thought experiment where he says, you know, imagine there are 10 people in a room and there's one very heavy key that a single person can use to get out. And they don't necessarily choose to do that, right? Would you say that they are consequently free? And of course, the obvious implication is it's very difficult to say that anybody in the room is free, because even though one person could potentially use the key,
outrun all the others and use the key.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, sure, one person could become an entrepreneur and have 300 employees working for them and lead a very happy life and pass the company on to their kids. But the 300 employees that they hired and that they pay minimum wage to, and whose benefits that they end up slashing because people like Poilievre let her do that, might think a little bit more dystopianly about the kind of society that they live in.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the George Orwell's War Diary. There's a line where he's quoting this letter from the time to the Times from the Lady Oxford who says that most people have given up their homes in London and, you know, gone to their estates in the countryside. And, you know, Orwell's just like, you know, I think the quote from his diary is, I don't know what it's going to take to convince these people that the other 99% of the population exists.
Yeah, I know. And what's the name of that Orwell book?
It's I think it was some Hitchens thing that I saw the quote in, like probably one of his essays, but I'll find it for you.
Okay, that's a good one. Anyway, yeah, thanks.
But yeah, it's you know, it's also worth taking just a beat on help is the sunny side of control, right? That's like because, you know, it just, I mean, especially like, you know, you want to be the leader of a nation that, you know, it's whatever, it's not perfect, it doesn't cover everything, I understand, you know, people still need supplemental insurance, whatever, but it's like you have, but like has actually made like basic healthcare available to everybody free at the point of service. And it's like, okay, so are Canadians therefore less free than Americans who don't have that? Right? It's like it sure doesn't, you know, seem that way to me. I mean, like, you know, just like considering how many Americans like stay in jobs they hate because they don't want to lose their employer health insurance, right? Like,
but you're not thinking about the private equity investors, right? Like, will no one think about the bosses?
Well, actually, that leads me to one of my own anecdotes. So I'd mentioned that I'd encountered Pierre a couple of times when I was doing my undergraduate degree. All of them were unpleasant for different reasons, and variably unpleasant, right, for several different reasons at the same time. But one of the most notable examples was when I actually was the help working at a restaurant downtown, volunteering really at that point. He walked in, didn't look at any of us, took his coat and just threw it at us with what I could only describe as the aristocratic toss, you know, that kind of like, ugh, just didn't even want to have to look at us. So I do have to say that if he sees, you know, control as the sunny side of help, certainly as the help, he didn't make me feel that there was anything particularly sunny about his personality. And I'd imagine from reputation that most of the other people who are in inferior positions relative to him, which very soon will be most of the country, would feel very much the same way if they actually had an encounter with this guy in a more interpersonal setting, because he is a deeply unpleasant person.
Yeah. Also, by the way, I mean, just, I know it's petty, but like, oh, these socialists tell you that you're never going to have to get a job, it's like, okay, first, whatever, put that aside, right? But it's like, has he had a job?
He has. It's called working for the Conservative Party of Canada, being a member of Parliament for different ridings in and around Ottawa, and complaining very loudly on social media and in Parliament about the Indigenous tar babies.
So just, he hasn't worked in, the glorious private sector.
No, but, at least he's not a Trudeau. There's that. I'll give it to him.
Yeah, fair enough.
And the great news is we can have all those things.
Although, actually, I will say, ironically,
I have for people.
Justin Trudeau has actually worked more real jobs than he has, which is not something I very often say about Justin Trudeau. But the very least you can say about him is he was a drama teacher for a little while, which is a real job that's apparently supposed to be genuinely challenging. So in terms of practical, concrete experience with what most everyday Canadians go through in terms of their working life, Justin fucking Trudeau of the Trudeau dynasty can say that he has a little bit more experience than our good friend Pierre, right?
And he clearly learned skills in costuming and makeup that he continued to use for many years.
That's absolutely right. Well, he's probably also Castro, right? And Castro always had a flavor for
the dramatic.
For the dramatic, exactly right.
But we've got a limitless supply of resources here. We're like a cornucopia. The third biggest supply of oil, fifth biggest supply of natural gas, biggest supply of uranium, fifth biggest supply of lithium. We've got not one, not two, not three, but 4 coasts to tidewater.
Right.
We live next to the biggest military and economic superpower the world has ever seen. We have a highly educated population and the best system of government in the history of the world, the parliamentary system. Mm-hmm. Not the best government, but the best system of government. So all these massive advantages, we just need to unleash that potential.
Right. So the unhappiness that you're seeing among young people seems to me to be a consequence of the mismatch between the opportunity they see right in front of them and their frustration at the fact that that opportunity can't be capitalized on, even if they're contributing their fair share.
And they're definitely doing their part. Like they really are. It's always been a habit of older people to say, the youth these days. When I look at the young people today, all they do is work. I am astonished when I meet young university students how much they work outside of their studies just to scrape by. How many hours of labor they do as waitresses or in another service job so that they can pay their bills. Way more than when I was a student, 25 years ago.
When I was a kid in Alberta.
And why is that? Like, it sort of sounds like he's almost just saying, oh, this is great. They have all this work ethic.
Well, and Peterson's about to say how when he was younger, he could work like one part-time job and pay for school, which again will raise the why. Why is that question?
Yeah, who was in power then, Jordan? Who was running the country then? I think it may have been another Trudeau.
I could work in the summer, and I didn't work on the rig, so I didn't have one of the high-paying jobs. Right. I had a more, what would you say, a job that was secondarily associated with the resource economy. I could make enough money in the summer in 2 months, 4 months, to pay for the tuition and my entire year's rent.
Of course.
Right.
And now these kids are working 20, 30 hours a week in addition to a full course load. And they look exhausted. When I meet young people today, they are exhausted. They have bags under their eyes and all they do is work. And the worst part about it is not that they're working all the time. It's that they don't see a light at the end of the tunnel.
See, but are you tired of feeling sluggish, run down, or just?
Oh, fuck yes, I want to see that. Why did you cut me off before something crazy was going to happen? Like 100%, this is going into some weird psychology or medical shit that's just going to be unbelievable. and you can't fucking block me from knowing that. Anyway, yeah, no, I think it was Kuba who mentioned this earlier. Maybe it was you, Ben. I think this really kind of demonstrates. Oh yeah, it was you, Ben. How he's not necessarily wrong in pointing out certain kinds of problems that people are genuinely experiencing, right? Like it is very much the case that a lot of young people that I talk to, students, et cetera, are working really, really hard, usually multiple different jobs, going to school at the same time, and they can't make ends meet. But it's that he never actually takes anything like the next step, which would be to evaluate, well, what were the social conditions back in the day, so-called, that enabled people to work part-time at a job in Alberta and to make enough money to pay for school, where costs were a lot lower back then, right? Instead, there's just this kind of nostalgic rumination that things used to be better, so we should go back to old-timey values, rather than actually saying, well, some of the policies that more progressive governments in years past would have implemented to make school more affordable or to make life more affordable generally, that might have been the reason for the golden age of economic opportunity, as it's sometimes called, that many people of Peterson's generation certainly were the beneficiaries of.
They're completely void of additive fillers.
What's that?
I said, oh God, thank God. I need to know this.
Extracts, synthetics, pesticides, or added sugar. The only thing in Balance of Nature fruit and veggie capsules are fruits and veggies. Right now, you can order with promo code Jordan to get 35% off your first order, plus get a free bottle of fiber and spice.
This is consistently one of the best things about watching right-wing media that has like internally generated ads mid-roll, right? Like that it's just always some like insane bullshit that they're trying to sell you, like brain pills or, you know, I remember once on the main show we were watching some like guy on Rumble denouncing Rashida Tlaib, and like it cut to like in the middle there was like for an ad for like Trump trading cards, I think.
Yeah. No, maybe if you just eat 2 Trump steaks a day, like Jordan probably does, then you too can see through the veil of ignorance to the dragon of chaos and the metaphysical and more than metaphysical forces that work in the world.
Yeah, I still want, man. It's really a shame. Like I don't believe I'm ever going to get a chance to talk to this man. I think if he wanted that to happen, you know, it would have happened a long time ago, right? But like I really want to ask him what he means by more than metaphysical.
Yeah, I know. It's one of my perennial asks as well, right? I just want to add jocularly, I saw some ignorant person in the chat. I kid, by the way. I love you all. Being like, I suppose that Canadian accent thing is a bit of a myth. That's not exactly true. If you want to hear the Canadian accent, the place to go in order to get it unfiltered would probably be the East Coast, right? If you're to go around Halifax, you're to go around Fredericton, then you'd hear what a lot of Americans think of when they think of a Canadian saying something, right? But you know, if you're from around Ontario, if you're from around you know, the more English-speaking parts of Quebec, then more or less you're just gonna hear people that sound a lot like Americans. I would say.
Yeah, I don't know. Say sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, there we go. There's a Canadian accent.
Yeah, it is true. I do say sorry a lot, and most Canadians I know definitely say sorry.
No, it's not just that you say it a lot, although that's also very true, right?
That is true, yeah.
The way you say
I'm sorry for that, right? You know?
Yeah, it's the there's a GA
hard O, isn't it like a sorry?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Vowels give you away.
Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We're like saying
sorry.
Or saying
right?
Sorry.
That's the American way.
Or saying progress instead of progress.
Yeah, we just say it normal, but yeah, that's the so, you know, sorry is the
progress. It's more proper British English.
That's true, yeah.
Fair enough.
There's also this my favorite accent in English may be the Donald Sutherland, Christopher Plummer, sort of heavily Anglified actor English, which I like to call high Canadian.
Yeah.
That's fun. I know what you're talking about, though. Yeah, and that is fun.
Yeah. High, like old stock, high Canadian.
Yeah, like Laurentian, educated, elite, actor kind of Canadian. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. All right, let's go.
Experience Balance of Nature for yourself today. Go to balanceofnature.com and use promo code Jordan for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get a free bottle of Fiber and Spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Jordan for 35% off.
Thank God I spend so much money on bottles of Fiber and Spice.
Well, I don't know why you don't get
the fiber is cheap. They get you on the spice.
Yeah.
Well, that's a genuine breakdown of the social contract, right? Because
Absolutely.
the deal, like you said, the deal was supposed to be, if you do things right, you'll be rewarded.
Yes.
Right. And that's the intergenerational compact, essentially. Yes. And there isn't anything that defines hopelessness more clearly than seeing that if you do all the right things, the pathway is paved to failure.
Right.
Right. So that's so demoralizing. And, what's even worse about that is that the people who are most demoralized by that are precisely the people who would be most productive and hardworking. Because the ones that are sponging along, they don't give a damn anyways, right? They're not losing any glorious future and they're not sacrificing for it anyways. But it's really not good when your economy is set up to punish people who are entrepreneurial and hardworking.
And that's what it does right now.
Okay, so let's delve into that a little bit. So I've been tracking economic statistics in relationship to Canada and sort of left me open-mouthed in amazement at our dismal condition. So from what I've been able to understand, the richest people per capita in terms of GDP per person, gross domestic product per person, so that's total productivity, is Ontario. And Ontario inhabitants are now poorer per capita than inhabitants of Mississippi, and that's the poorest American state. So the inhabitants of Canada's richest province are poorer than the inhabitants of the United States' poorest state. And that's actually occurred primarily in the last 10 years.
Yes.
And because we were basically at parity before that.
Yes.
And had historically been not quite as rich as the Americans, with some, blips above them, but pretty much tracking them one-to-one.
Yeah.
And now it's...
I should say that this has been widely discredited, right? The actual ranking is Ontario falls at about around the 14th richest U.S. state if it were to join right now. Not quite up there with New York, California, or Texas, right? But certainly way, way higher than Mississippi, right? And I should say it's also a ridiculous claim to make. Like I said, by any kind of metric, if you're just looking at GDP growth overall, the Trudeau government has done about as well, or by some metrics better than the Harper government in terms of, the overall size of the economy increasing. Now, that does not mean, right, that the Trudeau government was some kind of economic bull that has really produced bonanza growth for the country, right? And certainly not during the COVID years. But, it's just very, very bizarre that they've decided that they need to manufacture this narrative of crippling economic malaise.
Where do you think he's getting this number from, though? Where's this number coming from?
I really don't know. I tried to track it down, if I'm going to be honest with you, for about 5 minutes on Monday after I saw some of these clips circulating. And then I realized I had to prepare a lot of stuff for class, and I got bored, and I decided to do that instead. And I think that's about the end of my journey with that exploration right now. It comes from somewhere, though, because I've seen a bunch of different conservative Canadians repeat the same.
Could it be if you do the exchange rate with the US dollars or no?
Maybe that could be it.
I'm checking that right now, and the still incorrect. According to the whatever data Wikipedia has, the GDP per capita in Ontario in US dollars comes to 49,731 US, which is ahead of Mrs. Oh, no, it's not good. Yeah, the exchange rate is what's killing it.
Okay, so that is where the stat comes from.
Mm-hmm. If you compare Canadian to U.S. dollars, then obviously Ontario comes out ahead. But with the currency depreciation, I guess that's what's hitting it.
And that's not all the bad news, because it's 60% in terms of absolute wealth.
It's not the richest province. It's Alberta, which comes way ahead of
approximately on average.
The bottom 15 or so U.S. states.
Yeah.
Right. So now
it's really bad. It's really incredible. Like 10 years ago, the New York Times wrote an article, "Welcome to Canada, we're home of the world's most affluent middle class." And in that article, the Times had calculated that median American and Canadian incomes were tied, and that Canadians were slightly better off. Now, part of that was because the 08-09 financial crisis hit them harder than it hit us, but still. Now, per capita GDP in the States is $22,000 higher than in Canada, measured in USD. So that's about almost 30,000 measured in.
Right. So that's a whole other income, essentially.
Yes.
That's a whole other part-time income.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, as you correctly point out, their real estate is significantly cheaper than ours. So their dollars go a lot further, even when you match up the exchange rates. And what's worse than that is that the leading indicators are even more horrific. And leading indicators, for example, are investment dollars, because your wealth tomorrow is determined by your investment today. So if your employer, for example, is buying lots of new tools and technology, you're going to be able to crank out more widgets. So you crank out those widgets, then you can ultimately make more income down the road. If you take business investment and divide it by the number of workers, the American worker gets $28,000 of investment measured in US dollars.
This is per capita?
Per worker.
Per year?
Per worker, per member of the labor force.
Okay.
So you take the total business investment of the United States divided by the total number of workers in America, it's 28 grand. In Canada, it's 15 grand. So the Canadian worker gets about 55 cents for every dollar of his American, and they're both measured in USD. So how is the Canadian worker?
That's investment in future productivity?
That's investment in machines and technology, warehouses, factories.
I see.
Any capital investment that businesses make divided by the number of workers, that's the measurement. So now that means they're getting better technology, better new machines, better tools than our workers, and they will be able to crank out even greater wages for their people than we will, unless we catch up with that. Our productivity is another major problem. Right now, and that's productivity sounds complicated. It's actually extremely simple. You just take the GDP and you divide it by the hours worked in the country. So American GDP is $80. So for every hour an American worker works,
bring up something about these statistics as well. One issue that's related to the large-scale immigration that we've had for the last 5 or so years. You know, it's been more than 500,000 new Canadians coming in for the last 2 years. The people who arrive don't immediately earn their full potential, right? It takes a while to get yourself situated in a new country. Many are students, recent graduates who will be earning at or near the bottom of their relevant sector. So when you increase the divisor like that, you're going to be driving down the per capita, whether it's GDP or productivity. But that's also an investment in the future. These new Canadians will not long be at the bottom of those industries. And as more and more older Canadians retire, it's necessary for those new Canadians to take their place in their economy. In the United States, one thing that may be masking the reality of the labor market is having a large pool of undocumented workers that are routinely exploited in order to push the wages down as far as possible. I don't know if they appear in the relevant statistics, how that's taken into account. Compared to Canada, it's a substantial population in the United States.
Speaking of which, so I've been, this keeps running through my head. Our friend Undying posted this like last week or something. You guys may be familiar with this, but this is a classic clip of libertarian economics guru Milton Friedman.
It's a good thing. Mexican immigration over the border is a good thing. It's a good thing for the illegal immigrants. It's a good thing for the United States. It's a good thing for the citizens of the country. But it's only good so long as it's illegal. That's an interesting paradox to think about. Make it legal, and it's no good. Why? Because as long as it's illegal, the people who come in do not qualify for welfare. They don't qualify for Social Security. They don't qualify for all the other myriads of benefits that we pour out from our left pocket into our right pocket. And so as long as they don't qualify, they migrate to jobs. They take jobs that most residents of this country are unwilling to take. They provide employers with workers of a kind they cannot get. They're hard workers, they're good workers, and they are clearly better off.
Yeah, that's that is really the just the distilled in of American capital. It's like yeah, no, immigrants are great, but only if they don't have any rights and they're terrified all the time.
Yeah, I also think it's funny because I remember Elon Musk saying the other day that Milton Friedman was a Titanic genius who should be listened to attentively on almost any point that he makes. And I very much doubt that he'd be in agreement with Dr. Friedman on this one, given the fact that he's now apparently going to be endorsing just any far-right party that emerges anywhere in the world that takes an anti-immigrant stance, no matter how bizarre, no matter how xenophobic, and no matter how just fucking minuscule.
Elon has been going nuts lately. I know that's not what we're talking about, but
it's okay.
It's been amazing to watch him like endorse the AfD in Germany and like say only the AfD can save Germany. Like, what the fuck is that guy up to these days?
You know, I think everybody knows I'm pretty allergic to these analogies, but I did find it pretty fucking funny. There was a tweet that was going around from some Elon super fan, and I checked. I was like, okay, is this ironic? It's got to be ironic, right? And I like checked the Twitter of the guy who posted. It's like, no, he totally means it. Like he posts this shit all the time. And so he's talking about Maloney and enthusing about the AfD. And he said, if a right-wing Germany united to a right-wing Italy can come to power, it can unite Europe as never seen before.
Well, that's incredible stuff. I didn't know that he did those.
No, I didn't know that. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel like
familiar.
Yeah,
it sounds
like he would be the guy they sent to try to talk Smedley Butler into the Billionaires plot, right?
I will say this just to kind of wrap up our discussion with obviously my most important theoretical point of the night. One of the things that's just become chronically unpleasant about Twitter is just how it was always pretty bad since he bought it, but the volume of brown nosing towards Elon has just increased exponentially day in and day out, right? And I mean, I can hold my tongue at a little bit of brown nosing here and there. I mean, everybody has to suck up to their boss or to people they admire now and then, but like the sheer race to become the biggest sycophant on Twitter is, I don't want to sound too conservative, but like this is my Alan Blue moment, like just a clear marker of cultural decline as far as I'm concerned, right? I'm almost willing to sit there and be like, we need to go back to like the good old American days where people would just sit there and be like, I'm not going to fucking, bow down or show respect to absolutely anybody because fuck them, right? There was a kind of crudeness to that, but at least it's better than what I see right now where Jordan Peterson and Pierre and the whole lot of them just have to genuflect day in and day out.
It was like some super Elon suck up who like posted this thing that was like me and Elon.
Oh yeah, me and Elon. Elon Musk is Superman.
It's like you're not even out of your own fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like you're Jimmy Olsen, Superman's little helper in your fantasy, where Elon gets to go out and do all the heroics. It's like that's just sad, man. Like
it's so sad, and
like fucking even 5-year-old children get to know enough to be Superman in their own fucking fantasy.
Also, is there anybody? I'm actually genuinely curious about this, like. Because, like, look, I know usually the algorithm, like, pushes more things that you've interacted with at you, but, like, you see fucking Elon tweets, like, all the time, right? Like, constantly. And, like, I almost never interact with them. Like, it's like, did this man buy Twitter so he could, like, get it to relentlessly boost his own tweets all the time?
It certainly seems that way. He does, yeah. I mean... that has to be the case, right?
Yeah. Well, the court forced him to do it. He's just making lemonade. But
sure.
I think that the main value add for him is that now he's willing to kill the platform or compromise the platform just in order to bring himself up within it.
Yeah, that seems right. And I also do think, like, he's boosting the engagement of the brown nosers like crazy, right? Like, which is why, like, I have, like, I don't know, man. And I feel like I have had more Twitter interactions with people who are like, just outright wannabe fascists in the last few months, right? And that I had in the several years before that, right? I mean that tweet I remember I Q2 tweeted like this is like the this like if you just wanted like one sentence tweet to encapsulate Twitter in 2025, this would be it. There was somebody replying to me saying democracy is fake and gay.
Yeah, absolutely right. It is fun, yeah. Like just the sheer volume of responses to me that like take the form of like, "You're faggot, fuck you," right? Or that's the gayest shit I've ever heard. It's like, wow.
Oh, I posted last night about the because Jean-Marie Le Pen.
That's right. Yes.
Just died, right? And
may he rest in hell.
Yes, exactly, right. And I posted to that effect, and so many replies from Anglophone Jean-Marie Le Pen fans. It's like this is like such a weird niche form of reactionary politics.
Yeah, it's and then what Elon's also on about what Tommy Robinson these days too, like in the UK.
Yeah, he's been like really pushing that Keir Starmer pedophile thing really hard.
Yeah. Like he liked Farage for a minute, and now he doesn't. Right?
They had a falling out, and I'm excited for the falling out with Trump because I feel like it will happen.
That seems almost inevitable. Like I don't understand how that could possibly not happen. Sooner or later, right?
It has to, and it's going to be so much fun when it happens.
It is.
One theory I've heard about the push towards Greenland annexation is that Praxis, the network country crypto bro startup, wants to build their first colony city there.
Nice.
And if Trump can secure that for Elon, then it's like, okay, go fuck off and play in the sandbox, snowbox.
Well, this is something I've always thought about those tech bros with their kind of libertarian, aristocratic, utopian ideals, right? It's like, do I really, even in my worst nightmares, want to go live in a planned society where Peter Thiel or Elon Musk will basically be my lord and master over the course of my life, right? I think I would rather go live in North Korea, where at least I can get some peace and quiet day in and day out from the relentless propagandizing, rather than live in one of those planned communities.
They don't want you. They want submissive Filipino workers, right? As well as their brown-nosing sycophants, right? It's going to be a layer cake.
Yeah, a layer cake, of the Filipino migrants will be paid next to nothing and will die en masse. Then, like, just this
until the robots, get activated.
Yeah, like what was that Simpsons episode where like Monty Burns decides he's no longer content with just being, their boss any longer. He decides he's going to be their god.
Yeah.
It's like ahoy hoy, lordly mortals.
Yeah, that was the Movementarians episode. Yeah. Good stuff. It's like, the idea of living on an Elon Musk Mars colony, it's like, it has all the charms of living in a 19th century company town, except that it's impossible to fucking leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like forget Galt's Gulch. It's going to be Galt's Ghetto.
Exactly.
And
not entirely irrelevant, by the way, to the actual subject of tonight, right? That like, because Jordan Peterson, massive Elon Musk simp, right? I mean, like, it's
100%.
I mean, he's just like embarrassing. Like I think that the stuff that Peterson says to Musk on Twitter is so adoring. Right.
You can always tell who he's brown nosing with when he'll start calling them sir in a tweet, right?
Yes.
And it'll never just be Elon or even just not use their name. And it'll be like, but sir, don't you think? And it's like, God, like your instinct is just to sit there and be a sycophant. And it's so deeply embedded in you that you can't even help yourself when you're not required to be a sycophant, right?
It's the worst part of the Anglo-Canadian heritage that scraping respect for aristocracy, especially Commonwealth types, right? That did good in the Commonwealth of Rhodesia. And that's the only identifiably Canadian thing that I can find about Jordan Peterson apart from the Kermit accent.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's just a Gentile Ben Shapiro.
He's been sycophant to Trump too. I love that video of him saying, "Oh, I've done a psychological analysis on Trump," and like he's just so emotionally deep that that he's so worried about other people that like he puts on this stern face, but like really it's because he's just got such deep feeling for other people.
I mean, look, if there's one thing that stands out anytime you listen to Trump talk for 5 minutes, it's like how much he gives a shit about other people besides himself.
Well, Jordan Peterson is a trained psychologist, Ben. He figured it out. He can see beneath the appearance.
I don't think you understand the kind of symbolic dimension to this. Like when he banged that porn star, he was doing that for all of us because so many people want to bang attractive women that we get to do it through him. So even though he didn't want to do that because he was married and he was really a family man, it was for the people. Yeah, that was the reason why he did that, right? And you gotta respect a man who would bear that cross for all of us.
He was taming the Chaos Dragon.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
I did want to say one thing before we finish on Pierre Poilievre that I was like waiting for the right moment where you would pause it, but like it didn't come. I don't know if anyone else, maybe this is just me, but I feel like Pierre Poilievre, like he looks like the way Matt Stone and Trey Parker depicted Canadians.
Oh fuck! I never saw that, and now I can't unsee it. Oh god!
Like without like the beady little eyes. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of mean, but I'm sorry. It's just like I can't help myself.
It's kind of true,
No, that's awesome. That's the best observation of the night. On that note, I will say, by the way, Peterson is fairly sure that Poilievre is going to be next prime minister.
He will be probably.
But I do want to point out, right, that I saw a clip today of the parliament in Lebanon casting votes for the Lebanese president, and I do think that there's something here, right, that's worth that everybody should attend to.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. One Lebanese MP voted for Bernie Sanders for president.
I want that Lebanese MP to be our new PM.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Bring him over. Yeah.
He might have a Canadian passport already.
That's entirely
possible. Ottawa or Montreal.
All right. Well, on that note, guys, this was fun, and I will see all of you very soon, and we will be resuming
Saturday. Ask Kuba anything. TIR.
Saturday. This is Revolution. Ask Kuba anything. It's a call-in thing, right? Like that's the idea.
Yeah, I mean we have to chat too.
Yeah. All right. So call in, ask chat questions, send carrier pigeons to Western Canada, however you want to get your questions to Kuba, and they can all be answered on Saturday, morning West Coast at least, on This Is Revolution, and regular programming here will resume in about a week and a half. If you are in Southern California, come see Matt and I talk about liberal socialism on Saturday the 18th at 3:30 p.m. at Lawless Brewing Company.
Just to add an addendum to that. If you want to know how to hack me, buy me a beer early on, and I don't say that purely selfishly, because if you buy me a beer early on, the likelihood that I'll buy you two later on increases exponentially, right? So anyone listening, that's the formula to go for.
Yeah.
Yep.
Life hack. Yeah, sounds good. Last thing. A family member of a very good friend of mine's house burned to the ground in LA the other day. So we're going to put a link to the GoFundMe to help them rebuild, because this is we live in a weird late capitalist hellscape, and that's how that works now. So if you can, please consider donating to that. And on that note, well.
Yeah.